Our gospel reading this morning starts with the first verses of the 13th chapter of Mark. Now we're into Holy Week, essentially. The chapter just previous to that was Jesus talking about, or talking with various people in the temple, talking with his disciples, being challenged by the scribes and the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And this is the beginning of Jesus coming out of the temple and taking his followers aside and his closest friends and talking to them privately. So we have the opening scene where they're coming out of the temple. Now they've just watched the widow put in her pittance. And they're coming out of the temple, and you can almost see the country boy, the small town boys in these people as they're looking around at all these huge old buildings in Jerusalem, so full of their history or their faith, and looking in complete marvel. Now, if they came from Nazareth or some of the other cities or towns around Galilee, they might have been to some of the larger centers, because Galilee was certainly not a backwater. It was very cosmopolitan. It had huge cities in its own right. But Jerusalem, in the heart of the Hebrew people, had a special place. And they were looking at these buildings, these old, story-filled edifices that were around, and they're amazed, thinking, wow, what grandeur, what wonder. And then Jesus says, no big deal, they're going to be dust eventually. Some of them were, some of them weren't. But Jesus is trying to make the point, like, don't be amazed at what you see. What God's world is so much different than what you see. And that kind of leads us into this small lesson today, where Jesus talks about what things are going to happen. Earthquakes and fires and winds and all sorts of stuff like that. It's known as Mark's mini apocalypse, essentially. And often when we hear the word apocalypse to the modern ear, we're thinking disaster movies and horrible experiences and few people left remaining. Apocryphal writing in the times of Jesus and in the writing of the Gospels and most of the Christian part of the Bible, the apocryphal writing's main message was one of hope. No matter how bad it's going to be, there's hope, there's something more. And that's where Jesus leaves his disciples this morning. So let's unpack that a little bit, because oftentimes people want to look at what's going on in the world, looking at tsunamis and fires and excessive heat, excessive cold, and think they're signs of something. I think the reason humans like to do that is it gives us the illusion of control, that we can predict, that we can know what is coming. And it is an illusion. There's no way. And Jesus frequently is telling us, don't put a timeline on it. Don't have expectations. Don't look at what's going on and try to gather any messages from it. The best we can get is something's going on that we might need to work with. So primarily environmental issues. We might need to really get serious about trying to make our world better and safer for the environment so that these disasters won't happen. Or it could be a political skirmish where humans have to just get in there and start being diplomatic and start talking to each other and not resort to guns as the first line of response. Those are individual things that we can do as an individual, as a culture, as a nation, as a peoples. But those are not the big thing, the big end times, the big what comes next that Jesus was talking about with his followers, and what so many people in public want to highlight, this sense of doom and gloom and destruction. That's not what's going on. That's kind of interesting to talk a little bit about the doom and gloom. I was last year, I did a little bit of research. How many times has the world been predicted to end? Now, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was really interesting that almost every century had several recordings of people believing completely that they could predict the end times and predict what was going to happen. And they always had followers around them, and they were always so curious and confused and apologetic, some of them, when the destruction didn't happen. And then it'll go a little while and someone else will rise up. The Bible talks about this. The Bible talks about these false prophets, these people standing up claiming to have the wisdom of God. And this passage deals with that. This sense that this person represents what we should all know about, that their point of view is God's point of view. I mean, it's kind of the classic of making God in our image as opposed to the reality where we're made in God's image. And when we do that, when we try to make God in our image, that's when you get the hate stuff. And, God hates this and God hates that, and prevent doing stuff because it's against God's will. None of that is actually biblical. It's all about the ideology of whatever folk hero or anti-hero has arisen to get all of this attention. We don't have to look very far. Every culture does it. It's not just the Judeo-Christian tradition. Every culture has these folks that want to rise up and claim special knowledge. Jesus says very specifically, do not listen. There's going to be many people who come claiming to have that wisdom, to have that identity, to have that insider knowledge. Don't listen. They do not speak on God's behalf. And even when the bad things happen, and they will happen, there will be wars, there will be famines, there will be pandemics, there will be economic crashes. All of these things are going to happen, and they're going to happen regularly. Do not look to them as predicting the end of the world. These things happen because humans make choices. And some of our choices are very, very selfish, and they're bad choices. So we get people dying of cancer in a place where companies decided to put a whole lot of factories and polluted the land. We've got people who are dying in wars just because a politician wanted to have some kind of legacy and decided to lie to the world, and suddenly we have thousands upon thousands of people dead, and a whole bunch of other people saying, well, it's for our freedom, it's for our nation. It never was. It was all about the ego of a politician. We've got business people that will go and cry, well, no one wants to work for us. Workers are just too selfish and lazy. When the reality is they're not paying people well enough. And right now people have options. They don't have to only do the poor paying jobs. Most of these issues are solvable if people get out their ego out of the way. And that's something that Jesus keeps reminding us, is get the ego out of the way. The big buildings, this sense of awe, this sense of if we just do something else, or we just manipulate something, or we just focus our attention and build or destroy or whatever, that it'll be better and we will control a better outcome. None of it's reality. None of it pans out. The only place we can lay our faith and our belief is in God. That's it. And God does not give some people special knowledge. Through Jesus, God has given all of us the same kind of knowledge. Now, some of us spend more time talking about it. Some of us spend less time. Some people want to just boil down to the bare minimum, and they're happy to have that. Others will spend their entire careers focusing on 2 or 3 verses, trying to discern what else they can manipulate out of that and find out of that to make things better and more understandable to the people. But none of it is faith in the people actually doing these things. It is faith in God to lead us. And remember I said that the underlying message of apocryphal literature, apocryphal messages, is hope. There is a hope there. Jesus was speaking to people who were under Roman control. He had already told them a couple of times by this point that he was going to die. He probably has no illusion about how that's going to die, since there's only one group of people who were capable of executing others, and that was the Roman government, who had everybody under oppression. Jesus was not a stupid man. He recognized what was what. But he was inspiring his followers to recognize it too, to be willing to push the boundaries, even to the point of death, to make things better ultimately for others. See, that's where the hope comes in. Jesus told us, don't get caught up in the charlatans and the snake oil salesmen and the people who tell you they're specially gifted. They're just going to be full of themselves and not the least bit interested in you. Look for what is going on where you can see God in action. That's going to tell you a whole lot more about the people in the situation than anybody with a mega speaker is going to be able to tell you. Don't get caught up in the hype. Keep going. The hope is still there. The change is still there. It's going to be slow. It's probably not going to be in our lifetime. That's going to be really, really frustrating. But that's where faith comes in. that we incrementally move along bit by bit. That's the human promise, that we will learn from each other, our mistakes and our smart actions, and move forward. But do not get caught up with the shiny and the new and the gotta have it and the look what status this demonstrates for me. All of that is stuff that Jesus warned us about. There will be people claiming to be the Messiah. There will be people claiming to have the inside track of God. There will be people claiming that if you don't follow me and give me money and do what you're asked, then you're going to be on the outside. That's going to continue along with the famine and the earthquakes and the pandemics and everything else, because people are often very selfish. But if you put your trust in God, if you put your faith in hope, if you look forward to what is new and where your contributions are to improvement, to change, to making things better, that's going to move us all down the line towards this time when there will be renewal and there will be a sense of hope and discovery and mutuality and that world that we're all looking towards. But don't get caught up in the hype of today, because it is empty and it will fade away and it won't make any difference in the grand scheme of things. This is the message Jesus had for his followers a couple of days before he died. It's something we need to take seriously, as a person who was heading towards his death didn't have a lot of time to mince words. And the message to us is quite clear. Keep our eyes on Christ. Keep the focus. Don't get distracted. Don't believe in our own power. Don't think the next big gadget or widget is going to make everything better, because it won't. Recognize when humans have created a situation. Recognize when humans can change the situation. But don't pretend we're especially insider knowledge of God, and don't pretend that we're incapable of making anything happen, because God is the one who creates all disaster as well as all good things. Humans have to take responsibility for the mistakes, but we're not given the special knowledge to foretell the future. We don't have that. All we have is faith and a roadmap to know what's what. And we've got hope. And that's a fantastic thing to remember as we come to the end of our Christian year next week.